So there were some questions that popped up over on Instagram about shooting and editing in RAW. So that's exactly what we're going to talk about here today. This is going to be a great basic for anybody who is not currently shooting in RAW. So if that's you, stick around. We're going to have some fun. What's shakin' bacon? I'm Joni Simon. Welcome to my studio. I'm a food photographer, so if that is anything of interest to you, go ahead and hit that subscribe button because I do regular videos around here just sharing what I know with you. So like I mentioned, we are talking about RAW today, and that is a file format for images. And I'm gonna tell you just as far as what are the really wonderful things about shooting in RAW. I personally shoot in RAW. And then what are some of the things that you need to know before you start venturing into that world, because there are some gotchas. So for me personally, I have been shooting for about 10 years now. That's when I got my first DSLR camera, and I really only started shooting in RAW a year and a half ago. I mean, that's kind of an embarrassing thing to admit for somebody who is a photographer, but in reality, it's just one of those things that I think a lot of people have hangups about. Like for me, it was just this mental barrier of like, oh, that's gonna be really complicated and I'm gonna have to figure out how to edit it and it's gonna be just totally different. And in reality, it's not. You can go ahead and throw your camera into the RAW setting if you're able to do that. Usually that's on a DSLR, a mirrorless, although even some point and shoots today are able to shoot in RAW. And so if you can take and start shooting in RAW and just start messing with it in your editing software, you're gonna see that it's really, you're like, this is not rocket science. So what is RAW? Well, it's kind of exactly what it sounds like. It's in contrast to a JPEG, which you are probably familiar with. That's a very automatic setting on a lot of cameras. And so RAW is the uncompressed version of that image file, right? Because you pull out the memory card from your digital camera, you put it in the computer, and you've got a file and it says .jpg. Well, instead of .jpg, you're going to end up with something like a .cr2 if you're shooting Canon, and I believe it's NEF if you're shooting in Nikon. I'm sure Sony's got some other kind of naming convention, but it is just a different type of file name. And so the beauty of shooting in RAW is that that file has not been compressed. It is literally all of the raw information of what you just shot. The way that I like to explain it is, of course, in sandwich terms, and we're talking about a grilled cheese sandwich. So for a RAW file, it's like a grilled cheese sandwich that hasn't been cooked yet, right? Like you've got each of those individual layers. You can add additional items. You've got the bread, you've got the cheese. You could throw some additional items on there and then cook it, and then it's your own. Whereas if you bought a grilled cheese sandwich already cooked, well, you try to take that apart and it's not gonna have the same structural integrity that it had if you had kept it in its RAW format. So I'm not gonna take us too far down the deep, dark rabbit hole of the technical that goes into RAW and JPEG. This is meant to be sort of a rough overview just so you understand it. But when it comes to a RAW file, and when it comes to any digital image, we're talking about individual pixels, right? That's what composes a digital image. Well, when that image is shot in RAW, we have a lot more options in each individual pixel in terms of color, in terms of tone, so you've got a lot more options. Whereas JPEG, what's happened is that your camera has made some certain decisions as to how to process that file for you. It's making it a smaller file, easier to deliver, but at the same time, you're then more limited in the individual pixels, so you can't make as big of changes in terms of the exposure or in terms of the color. So it's really kind of already baked in. So to help illustrate this, I want to take the pictures over to Lightroom and show you exactly what I'm talking about in the editing process and the difference between RAW and JPEG. Okay, so if we jump over here into Lightroom and take the same exact image that was shot both in RAW as well as JPEG and do a little side-by-side comparison of the editing, you're gonna see exactly why shooting in RAW is so much more powerful, especially in situations where you've made an exposure mistake or some sort of issues with color. So here you can see we've got it in the RAW right here. This is the RAW file, and this was just taken in my backyard all of 10 minutes ago. It's about 12 o'clock in the afternoon. We've got full daylight. I purposefully overexposed this, just shooting for fun, but we've got these nice clouds over here, but you can't really see them in much detail. So let's go ahead and start to reclaim some of that. We're gonna take down the highlights, And let's go ahead and take down the exposure, and we're already starting to see some of it coming back. We've got some of that nice detail coming back through. I've got a lot of shadow going on here, so I'll just go ahead and lift the shadows there. So we've got that. Maybe throw a little contrast on it so that it balances it. I'm not gonna get too hyphy with this image because it's not an actual image that I'm gonna use, just for example. But you can already see we've got some really nice sort of, you know, detail coming back. We didn't lose anything. We've got this brick wall here, right? We can see the detail in the brick wall. So let's go ahead and take these same changes that we made over here and pull them over to the JPEG, the JPEG image. And if you just hit previous, it will pull whatever changes you made in the previous image into this one. So we're gonna go ahead and hit that and see what happens, and you can already see what happened. You've got numerous things that are problematic. First of all, we have not reclaimed the detail that we had, right? It's still kind of, it's very blown out. You don't have a lot of that detail that we had. I mean, there's a little bit, but it's not like what we saw in the raw. And then this wall right here, completely still blown out. We were not able to recapture any of that. Even if I threw the exposure way down, it's just that information's gone because it's been baked into the JPEG. We don't have access to that information anymore because it's been lost because the file has been compressed. So again, just a really great compelling reason to use RAW because you can reclaim things that are overly exposed. Same goes for things that are underexposed. Really helpful tool. So just like we can easily fix those exposure issues, equally the same, we can also fix any color correction issues, and color correction is so much easier in RAW. So if you look at this image, this was shot at nearly the end of sunset. It is very cool toned because there was not a whole lot of light happening outside. It was getting dark, but I just didn't have time to mess with the settings, and I knew I was shooting in RAW, so I could reclaim the color later here in processing. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm gonna make just a couple little edits like I typically do. My favorite little edits here, throw the exposure up just a hair, pull up the shadows just a little bit, pull up the blacks and throw on some clarity. And then in the tone, pull the blacks up just a little bit to soften it even more. And then come in with our shadows just to make it pop. There we go, but it is still a very, very cool toned image, and so we want to be able to correct that. Well, what's great is all the original colors still remain. We have a wide range of tones because this image is not compressed. We have all the colors of the rainbow and more to choose from. So if you go up to the color sliders up at the top, you'll notice something maybe a little bit different compared to when you're editing in JPEG. Is usually those slider scales right up here, that blue and yellow and the green and red, those are usually set to zeros. Well, in this case, you can see that blue-yellow scale is at 4900s, and that is reading in Kelvin temperature. So Kelvin temperature is a whole other topic. We can get into that in a later video. But 4900 is definitely very cool because typically daylight, as being sort of a true white indicator, is between 5000 and 6500. So this is below that, definitely very cool. So if we go ahead and pull that up more into the temperature zone that is daylight balanced, you'll see the warmth is already starting to come through. And I know how far to go because I still want it to be a cool image, but I definitely want to add some of the warmth back into it. And you can see right there at about 5629, right kind of dead center in the middle of the daylight balanced zone of 5000 to 6500. We're looking pretty darn good, you guys. And that was easy. That was like a one-step thing. We're not losing the color. If you tried editing this in JPEG, it would look a little bit different. You wouldn't be getting those clear tones because they wouldn't exist. They would have been baked out, if that makes sense. So then if we just pull this side by side, you can instantly see. Now again, I would probably personally go in and tweak the colors more in the HSL sliders and whatnot here in Lightroom. But just like on a basic one-shot like attempt at color correction, it looks loads better, and you can just kind of see that is a more true orange in that table. It is a more true white in the table runner, and the flowers themselves, the greens, everything looks a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more true to life. And then, you know, you can go in and make additional localized color adjustments, maybe to the reds, intensify those a little bit more, back off the greens. You know, a lot of that's personal taste, but basic color correction, worlds easier when dealing with RAW. So if I haven't already sold you on RAW, well, I really don't know what else to tell you other than it's how I shoot. It's really changed the entire game for me. And I've tried to go back to editing images in JPEG like on an accidental basis, and I go, what is wrong with this image? I feel constricted. I feel like I don't have the breadth and the depth and the ability to really manipulate the image into what I'm looking for. But there are some gotchas when it comes to shooting in RAW and understanding how to handle these files. And first and foremost, because there's so much information in the file, they are going to be a whole lot larger. So if you're only using your hard drive to store all of your images, very quickly your computer is going to get very ticked off at you, and it's going to start to slow down because it's going to get bogged down by having so many files on it. They're large, they're huge. So the best bet is to get an external hard drive where you can store those images. For me personally here at the house, I'm networked to do a terabyte drive, much thanks to Ryan, who is a total rock star. It's a RAID 5 drive, so what will happen is that I'm able to upload my images there. I take pretty much everything straight out of my SD card, drop it over into the drive, into the file naming conventions that I use, and then from there I start the editing process. And then because it's RAID 5 and I'm freaked out about redundancy, what happens is then that computer has several other hard drives in it that it's automatically making regular copies of. So if one dies, then I always have a backup, because I mean, that is like my worst nightmare, is to lose somebody's images, and I archive everything. But you can also get just like a great little hard drive, you plug it in via USB, and you're ready to rock and roll. So I definitely recommend that if you're gonna start shooting in RAW, just know where those images are gonna live, because otherwise your computer is gonna be a hot mess. And then another thing to know about shooting in RAW is you can't just take those images straight from the camera and start using them. Like if you're like, hey, these are properly exposed, these are great, let's go ahead and upload them right to Facebook or send them off to the client or put them on my blog. Well, the problem is all of those formats don't understand what a CR2 file is, or don't understand what an NEF file is. You have to take it into an image processing software such as Lightroom, Photoshop, something of that nature, process the image, and then export it out into JPEG so that you are doing the baking, not your camera. So just understand there's that extra step. But for somebody like me, who I pretty much edit every single photo I get, even if it's minor tweaks, little things just to make it pop, and then that works totally fine because I'm processing images anyway. And then the other thing to know is that if you are shooting in a situation where you're shooting multiple images at once, like in kind of a burst mode, that you can only do so many at once because they are huge files, right? It's gonna take a little while for your camera to catch up. If you do like 6 all in the row, then your camera's gonna be like, hold on, buffering. We're gonna have that buffering time. And so just fair warning that all of a sudden, if you're like shooting like a boss and you're like, I'm shooting RAW, I can't wait to go edit these, this is gonna be amazing. My shutter button is not working. It's because your camera's thinking. So just understand that there is gonna be some sort of lag. Now for me here in the studio, when I'm shooting food, that's not a problem, because generally I'm just taking one shot at a time. No big deal. So now if you haven't shot in RAW before and you're nervous about it, a lot of cameras, I think for the most part, what you can do is you can set for it to record both a RAW image as well as the JPEG. So if you're super comfy and cozy in JPEG land, you can have both versions to know that you're gonna be able to do what you need. But once you get confident enough and you feel like, yep, I'm ready to commit full time to RAW, I don't need those JPEGs, let's simplify this. You just change that setting, put it into exclusively RAW, and then you can just be hardcore cool, right? So hopefully this was a helpful general overview for those of you who are not currently shooting in RAW, just to understand what it is, how it can help you, what are the benefits, as well as what are the pitfalls. So if you have any questions, you've got the comment section below. You're always welcome to email me, DM me on Instagram, and definitely if you started shooting in RAW, tag me on Instagram. I want to see your pictures. I am at the Bite Shot. I love hearing from you guys. I love seeing your work. So with that, I hope you have a fantastic day. I hope you stay out of trouble, and I'll see you soon, okay? Bye!